We're back. This time we're taking a look at another one of my commander decks. This time it's the mono red Krenko Mob Boss. I really like the theme decks. Goblins are a very powerful deck. I don't run a lot of the really cheesy combos that I've seen in other people's goblin decks, but there is quite a bit of useful stuff in here, and basically you're just going to overwhelm your enemy with tokens and small goblins and just wreak havoc and annoy everyone. Anyway, we'll get right in and take a look. We don't have a lot of non-basic lands in this deck. It was kind of built out of scrap stuff I had laying around, so there's very limited on what I actually had, and there isn't too terribly many non-basic lands that really would have helped too much. Something like Valak at the Molten Pinnacle I might add someday just for the heck of it, but I don't have any extras right now. But we start off here with 32 basic mountains just to get us our red mana. Our only non-basic that's currently in the deck is Care Keep. Taps for a colorless mana, or you pay 1 and a red, tap it to put a 0/1 red kobold creature onto the battlefield. Now sure, they're not goblins, but they are chump blocker tokens. It's just basically in here as a way to generate an extra kind of token. Like I said, there wasn't a heck of a lot of stuff I had laying around to choose from for lands, and this one at least had a cool effect. For our spell cards, since a lot of our creatures are only going to be 1/1s, 2/2s, and small tiny creatures, we got a lot of equipment stuff in here to boost them up and to make use of various abilities to make them stronger. First up here we have the Sure Strike Trident. Equipped creature gets first strike and has the ability tap this creature to unattach the trident. The creature deals damage equal to its power to target player. Put this on one of your guys that's boosted up through various means, and you can start doing damage directly to players without having to attack. Bladed Pinion gives your creatures flying and first strike. It's another way to get past people's defenses. Flying goblins are always scary. Trepanation Blade's kind of an interesting one. Fits well with the goblin theme because it's very unpredictable. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, the defending player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card. And then the creature gets +1/+0 for each card that was revealed this way. And then all those cards go to their graveyard. Cobbled Wings, another way to give our goblins flying to get them past those larger defenders. Assault Suit's kind of an interesting one. I'm not sure how effective the second ability is on here. The first ability gives you +2/+2 in haste, and it can attack you or a planeswalker you control and can't be sacrificed. You put this on one of your creatures, it basically makes it so if somebody steals them, they can't hit you with it, which is nice. At the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, you may have that player gain control of the equipped creature until end of turn. If you do, untap it. You can use that, give it to an opponent. They can use it to smack somebody else at the table. They can't hit you with it. They can't sacrifice it. So it kind of limits their uses. The only thing they can really do with it is hit somebody else if they want to. Next we have the Ensouled Scimitar. This one for 3 mana can become a 1/5 artifact creature with flying until end of turn. The other option for it is to equip it to an actual creature, and the creature gets +1/+5. Kite Sail, yet another way to give one of our guys flying. This one also gives them +1/+0. Darksteel Axe is another way to boost up one of our little guys. Gives you +2/+0. It's also indestructible, so it sticks around. Full Shock Battle Gear, another equipment card, +3/+3. Trusty Machete, yet another equipment card, +2/+1. Full Shock Morningstar, +2/+2. Now we have our Red Sun Zenith, probably the only direct burn card in this deck. There's a lot of them that do small amounts of damage. This one, early game, you can use it for small amounts. Late game, you can use it for massive amounts. I love the Zenith cards, or the fact that after you cast them, they get shuffled back into your library and become reusable. Dogpile deals damage to the target creature or player in the number of attacking creatures that you control. Use this late game, you can swarm attack a guy with a bunch of your tokens or whatever you have, and even if they manage to block them all, you're still doing that much damage to them. Usually you can make it into lethal damage. Raid Bombardment lets whenever a creature you control with a power of 2 or less attacks, Raid Bombardment deals 1 damage to defending player. You have a lot of small tokens, they're expendable. You can attack with those tokens, and if they block them, you can still do 1 damage with this. If they don't block them, you're still doing 1 damage with this, and you're doing damage from the attack itself. The downside to this one is that our creatures tend to build up counters and things to make them stronger really quickly. So it's not very often that you have a lot of creatures with 2 or less unless all of those abilities are already off the table. Furnace Celebration is whenever you sacrifice another permanent, you pay 2 mana. If you do, it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. We have several sack outlets in here to get rid of our max number of goblin tokens that we can produce. And this just lets you, if you have extra mana, do extra damage on top of whatever you're doing when you sack them. It's also a nice way if somebody plays a board wipe and you have a bunch of mana open, you can do something with it. Impact Tremors, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, deals 1 damage to each opponent. With the amount of tokens that we can throw out in a short amount of time, this can do massive amounts of damage rather quickly, especially once we're using Krenko's ability mid to late game. Bogart Shenanigans, whenever another goblin you control is put in the graveyard from play, you can have Bogart Shenanigans deal 1 damage to target player. Again, this works great with our sack outlets that put our goblins into the graveyard, as well as any sort of board wipe where an opponent's trying to clear out the large amounts of tokens that you have in play. Goblin Warrens is kind of an interesting one. It lets you sacrifice 2 goblins to put 3 into play. You're gaining on the deal as long as you don't get hit mid-ability by something. Costs you 3 mana to trigger, but the ability to add that extra token every time for using it, and you can use it multiple times in a single turn. Empty the Warrens is another fun one. Puts 2 1/1 red goblin creatures in the battlefield, which isn't that impressive, especially not for its mana cost. However, it has Storm, so if you play a bunch of these other spells on top of it, for every one that you play before it, you're going to get a copy of this, so you're going to get 2 more goblins basically for every spell you cast before this in a turn. Tempt with Vengeance is a kind of a fun one. You basically put X 1/1 red elemental creatures onto the battlefield with haste. Then each of your opponents can put X red 1/1 elemental creatures on the battlefield, and they also get haste. But then for every opponent who did it, you also get that many again. So it really adds up. Basically, it's a 1 red plus X. So say you put 5 mana into X, you get 5 tokens. Then each of your opponents has the option of also putting 5 tokens into play. However, for every one of them that does it, you get them as well. So if all 3 of your opponents do it, you're getting an extra 15 on top of the 5 you already got. It's a very interesting concept, building off of having coat of arms and things like that that are going to boost up your creatures. It really makes them think twice about that though. Fervor is a great one. Creatures you control have haste. Can't go wrong by giving all of your goblin creatures haste. A lot of triggered abilities on them. Plus, you're putting those tokens in the battlefield. You can attack the turn you put them out. Really just an all-around good card. Cleaver Riot's good for late game when you're about to do the killing blow. Gives all creatures you control double strike till end of turn. That extra damage is pretty much going to finish off depending on how many you have and what you're doing. Next we have Quest for the Goblin Lord. Whenever a goblin enters the battlefield, you put a quest counter on there. As long as there are 5 or more counters on there, all your creatures get +2/+0. Goblin Bombardment's a great sack outlet. Deals 1 damage to target creature or player every time you sacrifice a creature. Nice combos are to attack with a bunch of your little chump token guys, and if they're blocked or if they're going to just get destroyed or if somebody plays a board wipe or whatever, in response you sacrifice them to this, you're still dealing damage. Goblin Offensive. That's what I actually named this deck after. And I love the flavor text on the card. They certainly are. But put X 1/1 goblins onto the battlefield. Costs you 1 colorless, 2 red, and X. Next we have Magistrate's Veto. White creatures and blue creatures can't block. Just an all-around good card to have in a red deck. Stops those white and blue creatures from being able to block you. And really annoys them. Especially when you're playing against White Weenie. Next we have Street Spasm. Deals X damage to target creature without flying that you don't control. The real nice one about this one is the Overlord ability. Normally it's a red plus X. The Overlord is 2 red plus X twice. And you switch the target to all creatures. So it's all creatures without flying that you don't control. Take that amount of damage. Good board wipe. Hellion Eruption is a good one for late game when you've got massive amounts of tokens out there. Most of your tokens are going to be 1/1s. Unless you have other bonuses to bump them up. This lets you sacrifice all the creatures you control. They're hitting the graveyard, trigger some of our other enchantments and things. But on top of that, Now you get to put out that many 4/4 red Hellion creatures to replace them. Staff of the Flame Magus, rather new addition to the deck. Whenever you cast a red spell or a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. Can't go wrong with that in a mono red deck with so many mountains and every spell except for your artifacts being red. And then finally we have our Coat of Arms. This actually might get replaced for a Door of Destinies, or a Door of Destinies at least is going to be added to complement it. But it basically gives all your creatures +1/+1 for every other creature that shares a creature type with it. The downside is it works for all players at the table, so anybody else running a tribal type theme deck is also going to get bonuses from it. The good thing about the Coat of Arms is that it affects all creatures of all types, so it can work on various ones, where the Door to Destinies only works on while it only works for your creatures, it only works for the type that you specify, and with things in there like Hellion Eruption that turn your goblins into Hellions, they wouldn't gain the bonus anymore from that, where they still gain the bonus from Coat of Arms. Either way, they're both nice cards. This one was what I had at the time. I may put both in there just because. Just keep in mind if you use Coat of Arms that it will help out your opponents if they're also running theme decks. Creatures are where the heart of this deck's at. We got tons of goblins in here to pick from. Some are a little less useful than others. I am missing some really good ones. It's just, these are what I had and what I came across. I'm still trying to trade and upgrade, and I have a list of cards I want to add sometime. So, for what I got right now, though, we start out with the Goblin King. All goblins get +1/+1 haste and mountain walk. Can't go wrong with any of those. Next up is the Goblin Marshal. He's not the greatest one. He's got a really high casting cost for what he does. He's 6 mana for a 3/3. When he enters the battlefield, you get 2 1/1 goblins with him. So you end up getting 3 creatures for that. But he does have an echo cost, which means you have to pay him again next turn. However, when he goes to the graveyard, he also puts another 2 of those into play. So you're technically getting, even if you don't pay the echo cost, you're getting him out for a turn plus 2 goblins. Then he leaves, you get 2 more. Next we have the Arms Dealer. Pay 1 in a red, sacrifice a goblin. Arms Dealer deals 4 damage to target creature. It's another sack outlet, also gives us that 4 damage ability. It does have to be to a creature, which kind of sucks, but the fact that it can be done multiple times allows you to chew up and basically destroy off some of those larger creatures. Next we have a Torch Slinger, 2/2 guy. He has a kicker on him for 1 in a red. When he enters the battlefield, if he was kicked, he deals 2 damage to target creature. Next we have one of the old school flip cards. This one's Zakai Lava Runner. For 4 mana, you get a 1/1, really overpriced. He also has haste, and when he deals damage to an opponent, you flip him. When you flip him, he becomes a 2/2. He has protection from red, and if a red source would deal damage to a player, it deals that much damage plus 1 to that player instead. Comes into play with our various cards that deal damage when our creatures and such hit the graveyard. Next we have Rummaging Goblin. Lets you discard a card, draw a card by tapping him. Let you cycle out some things out of your hand that you might not be able to use or might not want to play in return for drawing new cards and possibly getting something you need. Next we have Skinbrand Goblin. This guy has Blood Rush. You can pay 1 red to discard him, give an attacking creature a +2/+1 till end of turn. Or you can play him for 1 in a red. He's a 2/1. Next we have Legion Loyalist. He's a 1/1 haste. But he has Battalion, which is nice. If he attacks with at least 2 other creatures, they all gain First Strike and Trample till end of turn, and can't be blocked by creature tokens. Next we have one of our few creatures in the deck, if not the only one, that's not a goblin. So the Voracious Dragon. 5 mana for a 4/4 flyer. He has Devour 1. When he enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice any number of creatures. He gets a +1/+1 counter for each creature sacrificed this way. And then on top of that, when he enters the battlefield, he'll deal damage to target creature or player equal to twice the number of goblins that he devoured. Next we have Mudbutton Torchrunner. When he dies, he deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Next we have Reckless One. He's probably our largest creature in the deck. He has haste, and his attack and toughness are equal to the number of goblins that are currently in play. Next is a Raging Goblin, pretty much a staple in red. 1-drop, 1/1 with haste. He's great if you get him in your opening hand. Chancellor of the Forge, again one of our non-goblin creatures in the deck. You can reveal this card from your opening hand. If you do, at the beginning of the first upkeep, you can put a red goblin creature onto the battlefield with haste. When he enters the battlefield, you put X 1/1 red goblin creatures with haste onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creatures you control. Early game he's good because you get that free creature. Late game he's good because you get multiple goblin tokens depending on how many you already have. Next we have a goblin arsonist. Just a 1/1. When he dies, you can deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Goblin chieftain. It's a 2/2 with haste. Other goblin creatures you control get +1/+1 and haste. Always nice to give them all haste. Next we have a Mog War Marshal. So 1/1. When he comes into play or is put in the graveyard from play, put a 1/1 goblin creature into the battlefield. It does have an echo cost, so you can not pay that if you don't want to. He'll come into play and then immediately leave. You still get the 2 goblin tokens. Either way, you still get 1 from putting him on there, and then if you do pay the echo cost, he sticks around, and when he finally leaves, you get the extra 1. Tuk Tuk the Explorer is kind of a fun one. He's only a 1/1 for 3 mana, which is kind of steep. Does have haste. His real power comes from the ability that when he dies and he's put into the graveyard from battle, you put a legendary 5/5 colorless goblin artifact creature named Tuk Tuk the Returned onto the battlefield. Next we have Lobber Crew. It's a 0/4 defender. Has the ability to tap him to deal 1 damage to each opponent. Next we have a Firefright Mage. Another 1/1. This guy has to pay 1 and a red. Tap him, discard a card. Target creature can't be blocked this turn except by artifact creatures and or red. Next we have Bogart Arsonist. 2/1, they have Planeswalk, which is kind of nice. And for 2 and a red, you can sacrifice them and destroy target Scarecrow or Plains. Don't see a lot of Scarecrows, but it's nice to be able to destroy a Plains. Next we have Goblin Rough Rider. Just a 3/2 vanilla goblin. Warren Instigator. He's a 1/1 double strike. And whenever he deals damage to an opponent, you can put a goblin creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you can make him unblockable or fight somebody who doesn't have defenders, the fact that he has double strike, he's doing that damage twice. He's going to put out 2 cards from your hand, which is nice. Next we have Mog Flunkies. They're a 3/3 with a really cheap casting cost, but they can't attack or block alone. Goblin Sharpshooter's kind of a fun one. He doesn't untap during your untap phase. Whenever a creature dies, you get to untap him. And you can tap him to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. It's really nice if they have a bunch of 1/1s because you can tap him, ping him for 1, he untaps, tap him, ping him for 1, he untaps, and so on. He's also useful after you hit things with other abilities. If they only have 1 hit point left, he can finish them off. Next we have Siege Gang Commander. When he enters the battlefield, you get 3 1/1 goblins. He has an ability for 1 and a red. You sacrifice a goblin, and he deals 2 damage to target creature or player. Goblin Gaveler here makes use of all the equipment cards we have in the deck. He gains an additional +2 for each equipment card attached to him, and he has Trample. Bloodlust Trainee has an interesting ability. You can tap him to deal 4 damage to target creature. However, you can only activate that ability if he has a power of 4 or greater. He starts off as a 2/3, but we have lots of equipment in this deck and other ways to boost him up. Skirk Commando. Whenever Skirk Commando deals combat damage to a player, you may have it deal 2 damage to target creature that player controls. He also has a Morph ability where he can start face down as a 2/2 for 3 mana. Then you pay 2 and a red. You flip him face up at any time. Next we have Beetleback Chief. When he enters the battlefield, you get 2 1/1 goblin creatures. Goblin Shortcutter. When he enters the battlefield, target creature can't block this turn. Goblin Sky Raiders, just a 1/2 with flying. Goblin Rune Blaster. He has a kicker for 1 red. He's a 2/1 with haste. And if you pay the kicker when he enters the battlefield, destroy target non-basic land. Next we have a Powerwild Shaman. 3/1. He has Blood Rush. For 1 and a red, you can discard him. Target creature gets +3/+1 till end of turn. Or whenever 1 or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, if Powerwild Shaman's in your graveyard, you can pay 3 and you can return him to your hand. Next we have Foundry Street Denizen. It's a 1/1. Whenever another red creature enters the battlefield under your control, Foundry Street Denizen gets +1/+0 till end of turn. With multiple ways, including our commander, to throw out a lot of tokens, that ability can pump him up rather high. It doesn't affect his defense though, so you need some of our equipment cards to boost that up to give him some survivability, but he can definitely have a nice attack value. Goblin Balloon Brigade, just a 1/1, but for a red you can give them flying. And finally we have Tuk Tuk Scrapper. When he enters the battlefield, or another ally, which I'm not sure there's too many goblin allies in here, but it's mainly for him, you can destroy target artifact. If the artifact's put in the graveyard this way, he deals damage to the artifact's controller equal to the number of allies you control. Usually you're playing him to destroy an artifact and you deal the 1 damage from himself. Like I said, I'm not sure there's too many other allies in here. This brings us to our commander. Krenko Mob Boss plays very thematically with this deck. Like I said, I avoided a lot of the cheesy combos. I have some decent ones in here, but nothing too overpowered. His big thing with him is that you can tap him to put X 1/1 red goblin creatures onto the battlefield, where X is the number of goblins you control. So basically you're going to double the number of creatures you have every turn once you get him in play. He only costs 4 mana to get in play. He's a 3/3 himself, which isn't bad. But you're really going to be using that ability to grow and grow your army of goblins, and then either sacrifice them to our various sack outlets for their abilities, or just attack all out with coat of arms and whatnot to boost them up to really ridiculous strength. There's a bunch of cards I'd like to add to the deck. You can check out my maybes add-ons that are on my tapped out deck list. I'll put the link in the comments below. And feel free to comment if you have any suggestions or things you'd like to say. And we'll see you in the next video.